What's up, Bengals fans? It is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you, our usual Wednesday night deep dive show analysis, talking about what happened last Sunday, what may be happening this Sunday, and a couple things in between. I am Anthony Cosenza, joined as always by the brains behind the show, John Sheeran. John, rough one this week, buddy. This was a tough one to handle. I know we'll talk about it, but how you hanging in there after this one?
How the times have changed, man. You know, there was a time when the Bengals and Ravens were like maybe the best rivalry competitive-wise in the AFC North, and we're at a point where it smells a lot like 2019, specifically that game last year against the Steelers early in the season, where I think it was the same score as the game we're about to break down. But yeah, we're hanging in there. I got a Sam Adams Oktoberfest. I think it's the best. I think it's the best Oktoberfest beer. I think me and my dad are on the same page with this, but it's been about like 3 weeks since Oktoberfest in Cincinnati would have been, if not for obvious reasons. But we're hanging in there in style.
I like it. I'm a little jealous. I haven't had one yet. I do like the Hofbrau. Their Oktoberfest beers are always pretty good. I know that always reminds me of Cincinnati, but that is a good one. The old Sam Adams one you got there, and we'll let you kick off here in just a second on some thoughts. I know you've got quite a bit. I've got a few about what happened, and we're going to go there. We're going to get to a stat of the week, a soundbite of the week. We're going to break down the Colts game, and then we're going to get on out of here with some predictions and things like that. Just to remind all of you, if you're new to this program, join us every Wednesday night. 8:30 Eastern is for the live recording, or get the show afterward on any number of platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio, all of those. This show and all of our other episodes on the Cincy Jungle podcast channel are available there.
Yeah, you know, like it kind of feels like I'm going to wing this because it's basically what the Bengals did on Sunday against the Ravens. I mean, everybody knew that they were going to throw a ton of exotic blitzes at Burrow, stuff that he'd never seen, even at LSU, playing against SEC defenses. Like this was a staple of Don Wink Martindale's scheme with the Ravens, a team that doesn't have one elite pass rusher, but they have a bunch of just good to very good pass rushers that all work in such unison and synchronization. It was no secret that this was going to be the game plan to stop it and at least minimize what Burrow and this offense can do. But honestly, it brought me back to that Jets game last year. We're on the other side now. Like it looked like a team in the Bengals were playing against a college team, the Jets, and looked like a team in the Ravens were playing a college team in the Bengals this time. It was, and I know that after a game that's so tumultuous like this, of this caliber, we always have to, the gas bags of us in our industry, we have to point fingers at one specific entity, fire Jim Turner. What is his offensive line doing? There's more nuance in catastrophes such as this. And it's kind of what I wanted to get into for the weekly lineman this week. It's what Stephen Ruiz of For the Win, the USA Today football site, got into in his article, breaking down pass protection faults and schematic problems with what's going on with this Bengals offense right now. The biggest problem going into the season was pass protection, the offensive line issues. But it's also, how is Burrow, a rookie quarterback, albeit a talented one, a mentally gifted one at that, but going up against pressures that he was never going to see before and going behind an offensive line that was obviously going to struggle. A lot of things went wrong in this game. It wasn't just the offensive line being bad. It wasn't just Burrow being actually rattled for the first time in his young professional career. It's a lot of stuff, and it's not easy for us to just point at one thing and say that was what went wrong.
That's a great point. Great points. And by the way, yes, go check out, I think it's on For the Win from USA Today, the article that John referenced. That is a really well done article there. And maybe we'll try and get the link in our live chats for those of you. You're right, John. You know, you look at the 7 sacks and you go, obviously it's the offensive line. Well, PFF credited Joe Burrow with, I think, 3 of those, correct? Based on his play. The offensive line had problems, but look, there were play calls. I said this, I think, in our post-game show. There were play calls and pass protection calls where Zach Taylor, Brian Callahan, Jim Turner, whoever, still had Drew Sample one-on-one on a defensive lineman in pass protection, and that is a complete mismatch. Obviously, that we saw it a couple weeks ago. That didn't work out well for the Bengals. It happened again on Sunday, and like you mentioned, the blitzes were coming from everywhere. And of those 7 sacks, I want to say, I think about 4 of them came from defensive backs and or linebackers, if not more. So to your point, John, it was just kind of a debacle from a lot of different areas.
Right. And a lot of it came from either some play action bootlegs or just play action where he just happened to turn his head and not see the field and not see the rushers coming, or it came from empty set. And some of those in empty set, he motioned either Giovanni Bernard or Joe Mixon out of the backfield, or they didn't have him on the right side of the formation to either pass protect before releasing into the flat. There was one that specifically came to mind where Mixon was in the backfield and he was releasing out of the backfield into the flat as a pass catcher, and he was going into like the A gap to maybe like chip a guy blitzing there. But it was, I think, Deshaun Elliott who was blitzing from the B gap, and there was just nobody there. Like, there were so many times where the Ravens only rushed 3 or 4 guys, but one guy came home free because the offensive line pre-snap saw guys who were down linemen or guys who were showing blitz, dropping back into coverage, and they're either double teaming a guy who has no impact on the play, while a safety in Elliott or Chuck Clark or Tyus Bowser or Patrick Queen or whoever is coming in there hot, he's going in untouched. Like, the Bengals often had a overall blocking advantage in the post-snap, but the way that the Ravens disguise these things and they design them in the pre-snap phase and confuse the Bengals offensive linemen so deeply, it's a coaching issue because there are some things that could have been prepared for better. But again, this is like the prime defensive example of how you disguise these zone blitzes. It's a lot from what Pittsburgh did in their glory days in the late 90s and early 2000s under LeBeau, but Martindale is just taking that and going into the next level.
What do you make of, I can't remember who it was on Twitter. I probably should have done a little heavier research on it. I want to say it was maybe Warren Sharp of Pro Football Network or somebody. On his Twitter account, he had a number of screenshots and brief videos. I think you maybe did too, where there were a couple of Bengals linemen. There were a lot of Ravens defenders around and a couple of Bengals linemen almost seeming like they were looking for things to do and almost looking to get a guy. And they were often in plays where Burrow ended up getting sacked. I mean, is that just kind of playing into your point of just a collection of a lot of errors from a lot of different places, or is that strictly an offensive line issue? I'm seeing offense is really bad, fire Zach Taylor, Turner's not helping us. I'm seeing that in our live chat. I don't know what to make of that when I see those kinds of screenshots.
Well, the still image analysis is always a little shaky because there's a lot more context when you actually see the video. There was one example I remember where it was just the Bengals had like 4 offensive linemen not engaged with a guy because there's only 2 Ravens in front of them, but it was the edge. It was the rushers from behind him, Patrick Queen, and I think a safety that were rushing off of the edge. And they got past Giovanni Bernard and Drew Sample, who were in there for max protection. So the Bengals had 7 blockers, 3 receivers downfield. The Ravens only rushed 4, and they got home because Burrow extended the play out of the pocket, forgetting that he had Queen coming racing from behind him and lighting him up. And Burrow did the one thing that he couldn't do in a sack, and that's put the ball on the ground. And that was one of the game. I think that was his second turnover of the day. So there was that example where you're like, okay, what is the offense line doing? Well, like, they did their job initially. The Ravens schemed a pass rush there that took Drew Sample to the opposite side of the formation, and Sample and Bernard did their job. They got those guys out of the pocket. At that point, it's up to Burrow to not only do something with the play, but be smart and not put the ball on the ground and put it into precarious situations. He rolled out to his left on that play, and I think Tyler Boyd was the only other receiver on that side of the field where he could throw to. So he didn't really help himself out, but he also made the one mistake of forgetting where these guys are going. And that kind of leads into this next point where it was like 17 passes into the game. Bobby Hart, the right tackle, played about as well as you could expect him to play against the Ravens defense. He was doing pretty well in pass protection. His first bad rep, it came when the Bengals were again in an empty set, and Joe Burrow had Drew Sample on the corner route where he could easily get that ball out, but Park got beat at the last second, like 2.5 seconds into the rep. Burrow sensed the pressure, and for the first time all season, he dropped his eyes. He shuffled his feet. He looked like Andy Dalton in the pocket, and he had to scramble out there for 2 yards. That was the first time that we saw Burrow actually rattled in the face of pressure. He's gotten hit and sacked in basically every single game that he's played, but this one, it just felt different.
That play, John, and there was a play that I think I pointed out on my Twitter account, or I rehashed somebody that brought it up, that the throw to Mixon, where he scrambled out, Mixon's kind of going, and there are a lot of different explanations for this. One is maybe Burrow thought Mixon was doing something else on the route that he wasn't. I looked at it again. There was Mixon was wide open, but there was a defender in between Burrow and Mixon. Maybe that defender kind of blocked the angle a bit more than we think from that camera angle by Burrow. But to your point, John, about getting a little worried about picking up bad habits because of the pressure, that's a play that Joe Burrow makes all the time. The breakaway from the pressure, and you float one up to a guy that happens to break free from coverage, and it ends up being a big play when it should have been a negative play. He totally misfired on the ball to Mixon, and again, there are a couple of explanations for that, but to me, I saw that was a throw, much like the play you're talking about, that I started to get worried about a rookie picking up bad habits simply because of poor protection.
Right. And I know people are like, well, of course it's going to happen at some point if you keep getting hit and getting rattled. And that was what happened to David Carr. It's too early. It's only week 5 to assume that this is the path that he's going to take for the entire season. But it's up to us to fairly examine and evaluate what the current situation is at hand. And that's Burrow got punched in the mouth and he did not respond very well. And that's not like he could, because at the end of the day, the Bengals either put him in empty sets in very untimely situations, or they max protected and they couldn't separate downfield with only 3 receivers. It was a lose situation, and that by the end of by the end of the third quarter and into the second half, it just looked very obvious that it was an offense that was purely run on not getting their quarterback hit anymore. They were waving the white flag without actually taking Burrow out of the game, and at that point, it was just all that they could do because they couldn't muster up any offensive success throughout the entire game. Again, it looked like they were completely outmatched. It didn't look like there were 2 NFL teams on the field when the Bengals were on offense, and that was the only thing that they could do. Now, is it going to continue and persist throughout the entire year? I don't know. They still have 2 games against the Steelers to play, and that could be even worse situations because they have an even better defensive line and defensive scheme overall. But it's games like this where, the competition got raised. It was not the Jacksonville Jaguars again. They wasn't going to have as easy of a time against a team that knows how to rush the passer and confuse the passer with these blitzes. So it is a factor of strength of schedule. But also at the same time, this is still a quarterback that I think has enough mental fortitude to not have these things kind of linger and carry over into future weeks.
Yeah, I know we want to talk about obviously the AJ Green stuff and the defense, but just what to your saying here, John. I mean, that was my problem with this loss. I think you and I on this show Wednesday, and then when we did the pregame show on Sunday with Matt, I think all of us were kind of expecting, you know what, probably not going to be a win, but we're going to see some progressions, and we're going to see a team that is making strides to quote unquote getting there. Right, on their way to being pretty good, even with some of the roster holes that are pretty obvious. That was my main problem with this game, John, is it was never close. They never did anything on offense. And like you said, the disparity of talent was so obvious. It was pretty painful. And my takeaway was not only just, hey, the Bengals just aren't really there yet. They may need an offseason, maybe even 2 to really fix this thing. But also, just a reminder of how the organizations are run, right? I mean, what they do, how they build their rosters and all of that. And that was just kind of a painful reminder for me.
It truly is. And now in the last 2 games combined, the Ravens have outscored the Bengals 76-16, I believe. Yikes. So it's just where they are. But at the same time, we have to credit the defense where credit is due, because this defense against an offense that is usually explosive and attacks teams in vertical ways that only a few other teams can do, they shut them down for most of the game. Now, I know they gave up a couple early touchdowns, but those were drives that already started in Bengals territory, and the Ravens offense didn't have to do much. And our stat of the day is going to come on the defensive side of the ball, but we have to give credit for the adjustments that Lou Anarumo made. But going off of what week 9 or week 10 was last year when they gave up 49 points to this performance, they didn't do a lot of things differently. They still had this same 4-3 type defense where they were playing quarters coverage in the back end, and they were playing 7-man boxes to counter this rushing offense, but it was executed to perfection. And Ted Nguyen, if you guys have an Athletic subscription, he put out a fantastic film piece about what they did, and so did Matt Minnick for Cincy Jungle. His film review was about the defensive efforts in stopping this running game. And like the Ravens had, I think, 160 something rushing yards, but 70 of them came off of a Devin Duvernay reverse and a J.K. Dobbins, his one run of the game. So most of the time with Gus Edwards, Mark Ingram, they were minimized to their best, and Lamar Jackson only ran the ball 2 times. Now, who knows if that's because he wasn't 100% because of his knee, but Logan Wilson, Akeem Davis-Gaither, I think Davis Gaither started in this game. He stepped up with the role that he was given. Josh Bynes played very well. DJ Reader, before he got hurt, played really well. Geno Atkins only had a limited amount of snaps, but he looked back into his regular form. And Carl Lawson, in his first real start with a healthy Carlos Dunlap on the team, he played really well. So they had a game plan to stop and at least minimize this offense and give their offense a chance, and they got the job done. We have to give them credit for that.
If you were to tell me that the Cincinnati Bengals defense was going to let up 20 points and hold Lamar Jackson to 183 total yards, 2 touchdowns, but 183 total yards, they picked him off, I would have been like, that's a Bengals win. That is a on Baltimore's home field. Mm-hmm. I would say that is a Bengals win, hands down. And obviously people are going, well, there's 27 points. Well, one was a fumble recovery for a touchdown by the Ravens defense. So that's not on the Bengals defense. So, I tip my cap to them. There were, John, I hate to be the nitpick guy, there were a couple of big interception opportunities that the Bengals had their hands on. Davis Gaither had one. Logan Wilson had another. And there was even one really, Darius Phillips kind of jumped on at a ball that it would have been a difficult interception, but that's a pick six there. So somehow the Bengals need to start corralling more of those turnover opportunities. But hey, even when Logan Wilson gave him that ball, the offense did nothing. And that has been a theme of the year. Bengals get a turnover, offense does nothing with it.
Yeah, it's like a combination of these dropped interceptions are still plaguing it, but at the same time, they have a rookie linebacker with 2 interceptions. And that's something that I don't think any of us ever expected to even utter. Jesse Bates continued to play great. He was locked down on Mark Andrews on those passes over the middle. LaShawn Sims even played really well. This was his second start in for Darius Phillips, who's now in the slot and also on Wednesday's injury report, and we'll get to that shortly. But Phillips played well, not just in coverage, but as a blitzer in terms of containing Lamar when he got out of the pocket. He had a couple of pressures, almost a couple of sacks, and unfortunately Jackson is very hard to sack. He's very elusive when he's out there. So, credit to Jackson for doing what he normally does. But Phillips and Wilson got in there on some outside pressures and limited some big plays. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, when you're going up against that offense, that's all you can hope for. But like you said, the offense just couldn't do anything with it.
Inevitably, there's a question about fool's gold here. Lamar Jackson was dealing with a minor knee injury. He also had an illness in the week. And then, of course, I had heard from some Ravens fans, I think it was actually from Justin of Engraven Vids that maybe mentioned it to his fan base, that I guess Lamar Jackson unfortunately lost a friend suddenly the night before or the day before this game. I don't know details on that and if that has been corroborated, but that was a rumor I heard floating out there. But I guess, do you attribute that to the scheme? John Harbaugh mentioned something about it after the game in terms of the Bengals defensive scheme. Do you attribute it to that? Do you attribute it to a down day for Lamar Jackson because of these issues, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, I think Lamar is definitely capable of playing better despite the schematic adjustments that the Bengals made. I did not know about that personal issue, and I feel great sorrow and sympathy for him if that's the case. But he did miss a couple of practices, but I think they all assumed that he would be good enough to play. And when he's out there, he's still like one of the most athletic people on the field, even if he's not 100%. So I think part of the reason why he didn't rush the ball is because the Bengals just weren't giving him a lot of opportunities to keep it, because they were just playing such great contain. It was the spill technique with those linebackers, and they were always in the right spots. So credit to them, credit to Inarumo for getting them ready to play, because the other side of the ball didn't do so well.
Yep, 3 yards rushing. 180 passing, 3 yards rushing. I mean, that's the way you beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens at this point, and the Bengals were unable to do anything offensively. I guess speaking of the offense, John, I guess we got to go here. AJ Green, the infamous video. I don't like to necessarily speculate, and I don't read lips, but it definitely looks like a trade me type of phrase or something very close to that was uttered by AJ Green out of frustration. I guess he left the game with a hamstring injury. He rested on Wednesday because of that. They think he's going to be able to practice at the end of the week here, but truth of the matter is he is not he's not producing. And I want to get your quick take on that, and then I've got another question for you in terms of a bigger issue. But what do you think about that and what you saw Sunday from that situation?
Every time Reed Lips Twitter takes center stage, I'm always reminded of how terrible I am at it. Like I could watch that video 1,000 times and have no idea what he's saying. But like just like the visual of it all, he was clearly frustrated. He was clearly talking about something personal with the coach. I forget the name of the coach. I think Jay Morrison of The Athletic mentioned his name. But I mean, regardless, I'm not terribly surprised by it. Like it's just the way that things are going right now. He is playing on a franchise tag. His future is extremely uncertain. And to make matters worse, he's just not playing well. And I think he realizes that to the point that's part of the frustration. The other part is that he's just not connecting with this quarterback that they brought in after they got rid of the quarterback that he played his first 8-9 years with. And now the quarterback may be an upgrade, but at this point, he's still undergoing growing pains. And when AJ Green's trying to make a lot of money and he's not producing, like all these things kind of boil up. So our good friend Daddy McDuke, he wrote an article in Cincy Jungle defending Green's position in this case, because this is not the first time that Green has had frustration with the organization in general. We can go back to 2016 when he was on the verge of having like 1,000 yards in his 6th straight season, and the Bengals decided to not play him because of a minor injury. He was so upset and distraught that he went home from Houston and to celebrate Christmas with his newborn son. But also that was just something that we were not accustomed to seeing from AJ. And we always talk about him being, a classy guy, a team first guy, a guy that fans can always rally to. But when he has these personal ambitions and these personal troubles with what's going on with management, we immediately turn against him and we say, why is he not doing this? He has no value anymore. Trade his butt, like all this type of stuff. So there's a lot more nuance with these situations. But at a certain point, when you're paying a guy $18 million and he's not producing, these questions will arise.
Again, do you go back to play calling? Because a lot of people are Green in his time with the Bengals. He was a stretch the field guy. He was kind of a do everything guy. He would catch the short passes and move the sticks. He would go deep and be able to hit that. And really, none of it's really working. And because of the protection issues, they're not able to do the deep drops and throw the ball deep. I mean, is it a play calling issue? I just kind of struggle. And then on the video too, John, you see him. I don't know what he's doing on the interception return. Is he just trying to get out of way of contact, or is he trying to create an angle there? I don't really understand that, but I don't know. I'm just kind of at a loss with it. What do you think?
No, he clearly feels like he's being phased out of the offense. Like it's so obvious that the two number 1 and number 2 receivers on this team are Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. And it's not an indictment on Green's talent. It's just those are the guys that are connecting with Burrow more often. Those are the guys that Burrow feels more comfortable targeting and looking to downfield. Like at this point, it seems like the targets toward Green are just predicated and manufactured based off the play calling and not his personal preference. Like he's still technically the number 1 guy on the depth chart and he plays the X role, but it's Higgins and Boyd running the show right now. And it's so easy for Green to be phased out of this offense entirely, if not for that cap number attached to his name. So I think, again, all these factors are culminating into this process right now, but this is the Bengals and they don't trade their big players while they still have control over them.
Yep. So here's a thought that came to my mind. I think it was Monday. I started thinking about this. So far in the last few weeks, and twice in this last week alone, some pretty major players for the Cincinnati Bengals have come out because of coaching decisions and have shown some discontent. So whether that is AJ Green potentially saying what he's saying about trade me and being frustrated with things, Carlos Dunlap's demotion and his public talking about how the Bengals handled it or didn't handle it the right way. And you go back a couple of weeks, John, you go to Auden Tate and his agent coming out saying, well, we can explore a trade if they're not going to use him. You've got John Ross inactive the past few weeks. He hasn't publicly come out and complained, but there may be some feelings there on his end in his camp. I just had a little bit of a worry about a quote-unquote losing the locker room from Zach Taylor with some of these examples and some of these instances. I think there are a lot of young players, especially his guys, the Mike Thomases, the Joe Burrows, and all of that believe in what Zach Taylor is doing. But I have a little bit of worries with some of these examples that have come out, and you compound that with a 3-19-1 record so far as a head coach.
Yeah, the winning culture can be built so long as it actually works. And that was the whole point of last year. You go 2-14. How much can you rally those players behind you? And that was, I think, part of like the whole exodus of Marvin players and for Zach Taylor to bring in his guys in his second true offseason. Like this offseason was the first time it seemed like the Bengals were taking team building in an aggressive and serious manner. And I think that resonated with the players very well in the offseason. Like, hey, we're actually doing things to progress this team a lot faster than just draft and develop. When you establish that precedent now it has to continue. It can't go back into roll into complacence. So when these issues start rising again, they expect, I think, progressive action once more. And I don't know if that comes with aggressive changes in the play calling and the personnel, or even in the coaching staff, if guys are getting that fed up. But like, it needs to be a continuation of this. It needs to go. It can't just be a one-off season type thing. So we're going to learn a lot about how committed Taylor is to this culture and to this overall organizational shift over the next coming months to see if he's actually about it, or if he just had that one opportunity to do so and now things kind of go back to the status quo.
Well, there is, I mean, if AJ Green, apparently in the press conference this week, Zach has kind of said, hey, it's been positive with AJ Green this week when asked about this video clip that we've seen about potential trades and all that kind of stuff with AJ Green. But I mean, there I guess is an opportunity for Zach Taylor to make a statement of some kind there, whether or not AJ Green is dealt, and for what, if he is, for what you yield back. So there is a little bit of something there, but John, just not a great week of Bengals football all around. Some drama, a big loss to a divisional opponent. And then, of course, just to tie a bow on this before we get to the soundbite of the week and stat of the week. The soundbite of the week, by the way, plays into a little bit of what we're talking about with Zach Taylor in the locker room. But you touched on a little bit. Bengals lose DJ Reader for the year. And now, John, you have Trey Waynes IR, you have DJ Reader on IR, you have Xavier Su'a-Filo on IR, and who am I missing? There's one more
Mike Daniels for now.
Yeah, thank you, Mike Daniels. That was the other one, but you've got all four on some form of the IR. I know it can be a shorter term stint on IR this year than others, but when you have 7 big name outside free agents and 4 of them are currently on IR, that's not how you draw it up.
Nope, not at all.
How big of a loss do you think DJ Reader is going to be, just quickly before we move on?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the defensive tackles did this offseason. I don't know if they practiced on like some Native American burial ground or something, but this is like
ridiculous.
the 6th or 7th guy that they've lost. So I go back to the Covington trade. I think that was one of their more underrated best moves of the offseason, to trade a guy in Austin Kalicha, the linebacker that they were already going to cut, for a guy that would make most rosters in Covington. He's playing pretty well for who he is right now. I think he was a guy that was very comparable to what Tupou could do for them. And he's had to play a lot of snaps because of the injuries to Daniels and Atkins early on in the season. Now he's just entrenched in the starting role with DJ Reader out. And, Paul Dehner Jr. wrote for The Athletic, like, this is the time for Geno Atkins to step up, because if you have a Pro Bowl defensive tackle that's going to go to the Hall of Fame one day, and you have all these other injuries, that defensive tackle, and you have basically zero depth, is up to that guy to basically take the reins and just do the job. Like, I know that they wanted to rotate him more and more, but that's just not going to happen now unless Daniels comes back and doesn't get hurt for the rest of the year. They just are shorthanded at that position, and they just kind of got to roll with it. But Covington playing well definitely eases that. I'm not sure. Like I guess it's Freedom, Akim Melodum, and Amani Bledsoe as their depth right now at defensive tackle. So it's just not a lot of opportunities for either of those guys to get rotated out. But luckily, Covington's playing pretty well, but he's just not DJ Reader.
It's just a real shame that the Bengals never had the opportunity, the defense never had the opportunity to truly utilize this little rotation they built between Reader, Daniels, and Atkins. Atkins being out. Reader and Atkins only played a handful of snaps this entire season, and will only play a handful of snaps together this entire season. And that was supposed to be like kind of the linchpin of their defense. So it's just a shame that never materialized, and hopefully it will next year into good results. But I do agree. I like what I've seen from Covington. They've moved Khalid Kareem around a little bit to do some different things. And the depth is hurt. Now they brought in Xavier Williams, kind of a journeyman guy. I don't expect a ton from him, John, but maybe just some depth and at minimum a little bit of spells for some of these guys, especially like a guy like Geno Atkins that needs some of that, especially as he's easing back into the rotation.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to count Andrew Brown too, who's been in and out of the active 48 or 47 or whoever they have dressing. So he's in a position where he's just dressing every week now. And they like to state that Xavier Williams has been with the Chiefs and the Patriots for the past 2 years, so he brings that winning mentality or whatever they try to advertise. But at the end of the day, he's a body, and they need as many of those as possible.
Yep. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, talking about what happened with the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 5 against the Baltimore Ravens and a lot more. Happy to have you with us. Join us every live recording. So subscribe to our channels, whether it's the YouTube channel right under John's left shoulder there's an icon. Click that and get all of our YouTube content as it arrives, or go to your favorite audio podcast streamer and get the audio versions of our show, Orange is the New Black, and Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk, and you can get all those episodes right when they come out. Do us a favor too. Go on iTunes and leave us a review. If you like what we're doing, if you like what Ace and Zim are doing, if you like what Matt's doing, go ahead and leave us a review. We'd like to hear from you, especially if it's a positive one. We like the positive reviews. So if you got one of those for us, please let us know. But thanks for tuning in live. Thanks for supporting the program. John, I was going to say soundbite of the week here, but since we've been talking defense, I think you have a defensive stat of the week for us. Do you not?
Yeah. So
do you mind if I put you on the spot first then?
I love being on the spot. Ravens ran 25 plays to begin the game, and they had their first 2 touchdowns within those 25 plays. Now, the touchdowns were from 5 yards out and 2 yards out. So at the end of the day, they were going to score. That doesn't really impact much from an expected points added perspective. So the first 25 plays, they averaged about 0.4 expected points per play, which is pretty good for an offense. They scored 17 points in the first quarter, basically. After that, they ran 41 plays, averaged negative 0.27 expected points. They went on 6 consecutive drives where they didn't score at all, and that's with the best kicker in the league and the reigning MVP. So it's easy to get to lose this defensive performance with how bad the offense played, but it was just the same thing over and over again. The defense would give the ball right back to the offense would give the ball right back to the Ravens. But this defense played fantastic after that second drive, and I think everybody needs to appreciate that and go watch those articles that were posted about it.
Yeah, good call, and especially with some of the names we mentioned in and out of the lineup throughout not only this game, but leading up to this game. So good call and an overall good defensive effort. It would have been probably a dominant one had the Bengals been able to corral another interception or two that were kind of in their bread baskets at times. So, but overall, William Jackson's playing well, John. Jesse Bates is playing out of his mind. Those young linebackers are proving to be active and athletic and making some plays. So, and I expect those guys to improve too as the year wears on, even more so than what they've shown in just a few games. So I was pretty pleased. Pleased.
No, for sure. Like the secondary did literally all that they could, and they played about as well as you could expect them. It's by far the best unit on this team right now. And kudos to Inaruma, who's a secondary coach, being defensive coordinator in his second year. He's utilizing the guys that he's trusting in, and he's going to get Jesse Bates a very hefty contract in 2021.
So that's the stat of the week, courtesy of John Sheeran, and a good one, pointing to some positivity on the Bengals side. I've got a soundbite of the week. This is from Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow. Give me a second. I will put this on. This is a video from Bengals.com. He is talking with the media and talking about the mindset, kind of hearkening back to what we were talking about in our first segment, talking about the mindset of the guys after the loss. It was kind of a devastating loss, but Joe Burrow and the gang don't seem to be discouraged. So I'm going to share this and play it for you all.
How much can you and how much did you learn when you popped on that film from Sunday against Baltimore?
I learn a lot every week from the film. I'm not going to give you guys any specifics, but there's a lot to learn every single week, and that was a big learning experience for me, for us as a team, and as an organization. The mindset that we had after the game, I thought was positive. Nobody was panicking. Obviously, we were frustrated with our play, but there was nobody hanging their heads or throwing in the towel. We were ready to get back to work.
So, John, surprised at that? Is that just quarterback speak? Is that a rookie quarterback kind of parroting his head coach, who also said we're not hitting the panic button this week? Just side note, I think it's really funny how he's playing it so close to the vest in terms of, I'm not going to tell you what I see in the film. And then, he's also, you can't see his facial expression as well because he's got the mask on. So he's totally playing it coy. But your thoughts on that quote and kind of the mindset. Do you believe him? I mean, I don't know him to be a liar, so of course I'm inclined to believe him. But is that a little bit of player speak as well?
I think if you listen to enough players and coaches over time, you get the sense that they don't value strength of schedule unless it doesn't go into their favor. So they played the Eagles and the Jaguars for back-to-back weeks, and that man that we just heard, he had two pretty good games against those two defenses that are struggling and couldn't do much in terms of rattling him. Then he goes against the Ravens and think, you know what, it's a tough defense. We'll learn from it and we'll move on. We had success in the prior weeks, even though those issues that were definitely prevalent in those weeks didn't affect him as much when going up against an actual contending team. So at the end of the day, like, this is just that is the player's mindset. That is the coach's mindset. We do our things. We prepare the way that we prepare, and we should go out and win. But if we don't, it's usually just a case of us just not executing or the other team being better.
Right. I'm inclined to believe, and I know you've got many thoughts, statistics, and whatnot of this upcoming matchup against the Colts here, but I am inclined to believe, not only just because of the quote and that soundbite of the week, I am inclined to believe that Joe Burrow and the offense will play a lot better, even though they are playing another quality opponent this week in Indianapolis. I'm inclined to believe they will be playing better on that side of the ball, not only because maybe a little bit of a renewed focus, but I don't see Joe Burrow stringing together poor game after poor game. Do you?
Well, the pressure's on him tremendously because, I mean, we can kind of talk about the other quarterback who's lighting the NFL on fire right now. There's a lot of eyes on, like, when is he going to have that moment? But, like, I thought it was hilarious when Jeff Hobson interviewed Zach Taylor in his weekly thing, and it was like, are you worried that this tape that's now out there, it's going to be a blueprint for other defenses to use against you guys? And Taylor's like, I hope so, because now we'll be more prepared to do it. Like, no, if the Colts go out with the same game plan, I don't expect better results. And the Colts have the best pass defense from a DVOA from Football Outsiders perspective. Like, they know how to limit quarterbacks. Now, that could be a strength of schedule issue because they haven't really played anybody. And if you guys watched that Browns game from last week, like, Baker Mayfield looked like a completely different quarterback from the first half and the second half. The second half, they actually got to him, made the game a little bit close, but ultimately couldn't close it out because their own quarterback in Phillip Rivers ended up being what Phillip Rivers usually is, and just not clutch at the end of the game. So the Colts have definitely a talented defense with not a lot of stars, but just a lot of guys, again, playing just well together. And a great defense coordinator in Eberflus, I think is his name, who is just one of the more underrated defensive play callers in the NFL. So that blueprint is out there, and if it's used against them again, they don't have the personnel and the coaching to match it. So I hope that that doesn't happen. But even if the Colts do something of their own, they still have enough talent to limit Burrow once again.
So it's kind of a little bit of a surprise. There are a couple of surprising facets about the Indianapolis Colts now that we've transitioned into week 6 and previewing that. I didn't expect their defense to be as good as it is, and you mentioned the DVOA metrics that prove that they are a very effective unit. Darius Leonard is having a pretty good season. He's got 27 tackles this year. I saw, they're just playing well as a unit. I don't know that there's gone are the stars of Freeney and Mathis and those guys that put up the gaudy stats. It's really just kind of a cohesive unit that does a lot of things well across the board, and that surprised me going into this week. And then you mentioned him as well, Phillip Rivers. You kind of figure probably a Hall of Fame quarterback and a guy that's put up a ton of numbers, a lot of wins in the league and all of that. He's not played very well this year. He has not played very well this year. He's got 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. They lost week 1 to Jacksonville, the only team that the Bengals have beat to this point. They lost last week. Rivers didn't play well down the stretch in that game. So kind of a mixed bag and almost reversed expectations in terms of how each side of the ball is performing.
Yeah, and before either of us gets roasted by someone, they do have DeForest Buckner, who's playing. Yeah. So they at least have 1 star, which I should have mentioned earlier. But yeah, that secondary, they don't have Malik Hooker right now. He's hurt, unfortunately. They have a reclamation project in Xavier Rhodes, who's playing really well at cornerback. They have Julian Blackman. Yeah, they have Julian Blackman, who's unfortunately injured right now, but he's playing well in run defense. Like, again, it's just a well-coached team, and that's going to be a problem for the Bengals, who have proven that they just don't have very good coaching right now, and they need to rely on the talent that they're developing. But you're right. If the Bengals have a chance in this game, it's because Phillip Rivers doesn't really scare anybody. And if the Bengals defense continues the performance from last week, I think they have a good chance of doing that as well. Like Jonathan Taylor is a good running back, and that offensive line for the Colts is much better than any offensive line that the Bengals have played this entire year. Like even that Browns offensive line, it's very similar in the fact that the Colts have 3 great interior blockers. Quentin Nelson's the best guard in the game. Ryan Kelly, Cincinnati local, Westchester guy. He's at center. He's the highest paid center in the league. Mark Glowinski at right guard is playing pretty well too. If they get Anthony Cosenza back, who missed last game, and they had to have LaRaven Clark at left tackle, the offensive line becomes even better. So the opportunities for guys like Carl Lawson and Khalid Kareem now, who has to play a bigger role with Sam Hubbard out, their opportunities get a little bit minimized from a pass rushing perspective. And if Rivers does nothing else, he gets the ball pretty quickly, and he's more times than not accurate on those short throws. So it's going to be a lot of collapsing down onto the ball and collapsing from your zones. And that's the way to keep this game competitive, because unfortunately, this is another defense that does a good job of just limiting what offenses do best.
Before we kind of get to the update on what's going on with injuries and what's going on with the report as of midweek, in our pregame or our pre-show notes, rather, John, you mentioned a possible quarterback crisis for Indianapolis. There have been a couple of calls, maybe kind of to what I said a little bit earlier about a real up and down year from Phillip Rivers. There's been a couple of calls maybe to move to Jacoby Brissett. I don't know how realistic that is, but I mean, do you think Rivers lasts the whole year? Is this one of those patented get right with the Cincinnati Bengals for the Indianapolis Colts game? Is Phillip Rivers going to get right playing the Cincinnati Bengals this week? I hope not, but I don't know. What do you make of that? That I find it hard to believe they would bench Rivers, but I guess stranger things have happened.
Well, they're paying him a lot, like I think $25 million a year to be like the guy over Brissett, to be the answer to win in the short term right now. But over the past 2 weeks, he's by far been the worst quarterback in the league. He's got like a 43.8 grade from Pro Football Focus. No one who's played at least 50 snaps in that time has lower than a 58, and that's Matt Ryan at the second to worst spot. So he's not playing well, and he's putting that team in bad situations. So it's very possible that they're just the lesser of the 5 or 6 3-2 teams out there right now, and he's like the biggest weakness. And that was the whole point. Like if they just have a quarterback, then they can just cakewalk into the weak AFC South and get into the playoffs. But if they continue to have inconsistent quarterback play, at a certain point you have to think maybe we have to go to Brissett, because again, this is just a win now period for them. They mortgaged their immediate future to get a veteran to just be a stable option to get them into a position to advance in the playoffs, but he's just not doing it right now. So will he bounce back? I don't know. I think the receivers are decent enough, even if they don't have your guy Michael Pittman out there right now. But again, with that offensive line to limit the Bengals pass rush and just have him buy enough time to not make those mistakes, yeah, this could be a bounce back game, but I want to see it first.
Interesting little quote from our buddy, the Bengal here. I heard that Haskins was on the trade block, and I could see them trading for him. We'll see. Colts are – they're not committed to Brissett, obviously, because they grabbed Phillip Rivers, and Phillip Rivers probably doesn't have a lot of years of football left. So, and especially based on what we've seen this year. So it's possible, but Dwayne Haskins probably needs a change of scenery regardless. That doesn't seem to be working out well for anybody over there. Let's look at the injury report as of Wednesday. Again, this is, depending on when you're listening to this show, this is definitely prone to changing, but you've got the veteran rest days for Atkins and Dunlap. You have a shoulder injury that caused Darius Phillips to not practice. That is not good. Sam Hubbard left last week with an elbow injury. Don't know exactly how severe that is. I don't know if there was like a dislocation there or a bad bone bruise or something there. He is not practicing and probably will not play this week. Auden Tate, a shoulder injury, did not practice. And then you've got limited practice from Mackenzie Alexander. That is a good sign. He sat out last week. Giovanni Bernard, a groin injury, limited practice. I'm sure he will probably be good to go. And then we talked about AJ Green with that hamstring injury, limited practice on Wednesday. They think he's going to be a bit more full go as the week goes on. But some big names on that list, John.
Yeah, I think the Tate one was interesting because Ben Baby, a good friend of the show, he said that he was participating in special teams drills, so he wasn't technically out for the entire practice. He should have been probably listed as limited. But if he and Green can't go or not at 100%, this may be the game that we see John Ross back out there. It was 2018, the first game of that season where he caught a touchdown, and it was the first of 7 for Ross that season. But he's been inactive for the past 3 weeks. He was listed last week with like an illness, but who even knows that was legitimate? Maybe they just wanted to label him with something ambiguous to say that he's not a healthy scratch this week. But yeah. But like if they can't have Tate and Green, or if both those guys aren't 100%, then what else do you have to lose? Like, you have no verticality in this offense right now. You're basically back to square one where you have been for the past few years. When Ross hasn't been on the field, you don't have a lot of speed, and the only other guy that was kind of that was relatively as fast as him on the field was AJ Green, and he's not healthy, and even when he has been out there, he doesn't look like he has that second gear and that verticality to his game anymore. So, like, at this point, what else do you have to lose? Like, at least try it out until it somewhat works.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to touch on that when we go to kind of some predictions and keys to the game here in just a minute. You mentioned a couple of these names here: Julian Blackmon, Trey Burton, not injury related. Justin Houston did not practice. Darius Leonard did not practice. I'm inclined to think that most of those will probably still practice. Especially maybe the Trey Burton one, the not injury related, just some rest. But you mentioned Cosenza. By the way, I always crack up every time I see that guy's name. It's so close to mine. It's hilarious. He was limited this week, and then you got Jordan Wilkins, the running back, limited practice. So any thoughts on what you're seeing there? I mean, I know you've touched on it a little bit, but Justin Houston not practicing could be a blessing of some sort.
Yeah, seeing like Houston's right now, I mean, he's their second best edge rusher. He's like 30-something years old. So it's right now Buckner and a bunch of other guys who are still kind of getting home, but it's just not a great unit to rush the passer. So maybe the Bengals have a slight break in terms of in handling pass protection duties. Darius Leonard, he was a legitimate Rookie of the Year candidate a couple years ago. He's a very solid linebacker, and he didn't play last week, and he might not play this week. Costanza's the big one, though, because if he doesn't go, that leaves a weakness on that offensive line. LaRaven Clark started at left tackle for the Colts last week against the Browns, and he was by far the worst player. And that was an advantage for the Browns because they had like Myles Garrett and other guys going up against him. So that's an opportunity for Carl Lawson to kind of roll with at right defensive end if Costanza can't play, but he was limited today, so it looks like he's on the way back.
So let's talk about some keys to this game and what the Bengals need to do to potentially, I don't know, sneak out with a win, a bounce back, at least a respectable showing against a team that's thought of as pretty good in the Indianapolis Colts. I want to start with what you mentioned about the John Ross thing, because that was another thought I had when I was going through that rabbit hole of AJ Green, Auden Tate requesting trades and all that stuff we talked about earlier. You mentioned this, and when we were talking about the Ravens, there is a major separation issue from the Bengals wide receivers from opposing defensive backs, whether that is play calling, whether that is a lack of speed, or what have you. Sometimes a player taking games off or getting benched can work totally negatively or totally positively, depending on the person's psyche and how they decide to bounce back from that. John Ross now, has it been 3 games in a row? He's been a healthy scratch, at least 2. I know that. So is this the week that you think, let's just try and stretch the field? Let's get somebody to at least command attention. Maybe that's the key. If AJ Green does end up coming back and playing, maybe then a little more attention to the speed guy opens things up for AJ Green. I don't know, but like you said, I think it's time to try something.
Yeah, anything other than what they've been doing would help. They're pigeonholing Higgins into that role right now, and unfortunately there's just been zero chemistry on those deep balls. I think the one that they tried this past week, it was a post route over the middle of, I think, play action, and Burrow tried to throw him vertically when Higgins was trying to go more towards over the middle of the field, and Jimmy Smith just locked him up, and it was just an overthrow. And I think the very next play, it was either like a failed third down or a disaster sack of some sort. So like they're trying to get Higgins involved there, but I mean, Jimmy Smith and Marlon Humphrey and those cornerbacks, like they do a good job of locking those guys up vertically. Again, the Colts don't really have a weakness on defense right now. They're as good as defending the pass as they are defending the run. So it's going to be another big test for this offense to kind of open things up. In terms of just how did they win though, like I think that they need to have Phillip Rivers have a bad game. They need that same defensive performance that we saw last week to keep this game close. I think whatever the over-under is right now, I would probably take the under because I don't trust either offense to move the ball consistently against these two defenses. But in terms of the offenses, like the Colts have the obvious advantage at offensive line, especially going up against a battered and beaten down Bengals defensive line. So there's a chance that the Colts just kind of steamroll their way to like a close victory. But to capitalize on any mistakes that Phillip Rivers gives to this defense, that's going to be the key to help out their offense as much as possible.
How big of a factor do you think that the running game will be, given Rivers' issues, given the depleted, no DJ Reader, no Sam Hubbard, some issues on the Bengals defense in terms of injury, and they've given up basically, I think it's over 100 yards per game in every game except the Jaguars win, right? So 100 yards rushing, that is. How big of a factor do you think that is, and how big of a factor do you think Jonathan Taylor is this week? He's averaging 4 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns through 5 games so far. He's one of the guys that a lot of people were hot on football, but I don't know. Do we expect kind of a boring approach from the Indianapolis Colts and, like you said, kind of grind out the clock, or do you think that this is going to maybe be a little bit of a shootout between Rivers and Burrow?
If it's a shootout, it might be an ugly one. Like I feel like if I'm the Colts, that would be probably my plan. If I can get away just running the ball 30 times and just having marginal success enough to sustain drives and get 2 or 3 touchdowns, that would probably be the best chance because the Bengals run defense is more suspect than their pass defense right now, especially with all those bodies out. They're going to have Andrew Brown and Xavier Williams play significant snaps, try to rotate with Atkins and Covington. Atkins is going up all day against Quentin Nelson, and unfortunately at this point in their careers, I'm taking Nelson 9 reps out of 10, right? And like it's up to those linebackers to close down and be the spill players, be the guys to force the runs back inside. Taylor is a talented running back, and he's a guy that can get yards after contact. So like when they do pass the ball, like they have to take advantage of any inaccurate passes that Phillip Rivers throws, or any time that he tries to be the hero ball player that he is. So like, again, Glowinski, Nelson, Kelly, one of the best interior trio blockers that they have going up against a battered defensive line for the Bengals. It could be a matchup that they just exploit all game.
And that's my fear, by the way. That is probably my biggest fear in this game, where it's just, they get steamrolled in the run game, where you're just like, it's just kind of one of those statement game type of things. I hope that's not the case. What do the Bengals need to do? I mean, from a big picture standpoint, we can say, well, they need to block better, and they need to, what are some of the kind of finer points this week where they maybe can get a win, or at least make this a respectable game, and something where they can say, you know what, we'll put a feather in our cap on this when we played pretty well this week.
I guess to reiterate, like I think turnovers will be key in terms of the Bengals forcing them and giving the offense easier field position. Like if they have to go 10 or 12 times to go 70 yards down the field against this defense, I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to get enough points on the board against the Colts offense. But I mean, just showing any signs of progress from last week on the offensive side, like just offensive lines handling basic stunts like they did against the Jaguars, but much better. To just do it a little bit better than what they did against the Ravens, that would be fantastic. Like I don't have a lot of confidence in the running game ever getting going unless there's a clear talent disparity like we saw against the Jaguars. If the opposition has the bodies to stop the run, and the Colts definitely do, it's just like Joe Mixon's just dead on arrival unless he gets involved in the screen game. But unfortunately, the screen game for the Bengals has been their worst enemy. Like they can't run a successful screen to save their lives. So it's just not a lot of hope in terms of the running game carrying Burrow in the passing game unless there's a clear matchup advantage on their side, and they don't have that in this game. So it's going to come down to Burrow connecting with his receivers against a very talented and cohesive secondary. And if they end up converting on some of these big plays that they haven't, then they have a chance to actually get some points on some long drives.
I've got 2, and I guess they're sort of big picture, but also kind of finer points a little bit. On defense, I think when those opportunities arise, like you mentioned, to the turnovers, when those opportunities arise, the Bengals can't survive games when they have opportunities to get 3-4 interceptions and only corral one. You can't continue to do that. So if and when those opportunities arise, you have to make that play. You have to make that play. And of course, on offense, if they do make that play, they have to respond with points. But also, John, to me on offense, they need to gain more positive yardage, even if it's 3 yards, 4 yards, what have you, on first and second down, because by the time they get to third down, it's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 14, because a sack has occurred, a disastrous run has occurred, a penalty has occurred, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, what's Joe Burrow, rookie quarterback, supposed to do behind a poor offensive line and it's 3rd and 11, right? So you have to find ways to get at least minimally positive yardage where, instead of losing 4 yards on first down, you get 3 or 4, and that's an 8-yard swing, right? So that's, to me, I think the early downs and winning some of those on the Bengals offense. And that really also drives confidence. You're kind of like, hey, we're not moving backwards all the time. We're actually kind of getting, even if it is 3 yards in a cloud of dust or what have you, I think it breeds a little confidence there. So those are a couple of mine.
Yeah, and I just did some research to go off of that point. Like, the Bengals have had 34 plays on third down where they need 7 or more yards. There's only been 2 teams that have more than that: the Eagles and the Giants. So not great company that you want to be in. And the average yardage that they need to gain on those plays is 12.1, and that ranks, I think, bottom 5. So yeah, they've not been putting themselves in great positions on third down. But unfortunately, like, they're, I think, the third lowest. They have the third lowest pass rate on second and long. So they've been trying to run the ball a lot in those situations, and the running game has just not done them any favors. So at a certain point, you just got to say, just pass it. Like, the best teams, the most efficient offenses, they pass on second and long, because at the end of the day, if it's an incompletion, it's just a 3rd and 7 because when you're running the ball on second and long and you're losing, like, on average, like 2 yards a game on those plays, like, it makes you even more dead than you already were in the first place. So, like, they need to just, you're right, find a way to generate at least easier yardage, even if it's not a first down on some of those passing plays. Give yourself a chance to at least get yourself in a more manageable situation.
Yep, and if the Bengals are able to move the ball through the air early and effectively, defense starts to move back a little bit, then you can utilize the run a little. There's a little more running room all of a sudden, so you can use the pass to set up the run. I know we've talked about that a lot on this program and on the website before on cincyjungle.com. Let's call our shot, make some predictions if you want, and then we'll drop the mic and get out of here. If you want to do a score prediction, or if you think something wacky happens in this one, John, what do you think?
I feel like the line has dropped from what it was like. What was it, like 10 at the beginning? Now it's like a little bit like a 9.5 or something, and it may even drop a little bit more because this is just 2 bad offenses right now going up against 2 pretty good defenses. So it's not going to be a lot of high-powered plays and a lot of scoring. I think that we will see either Jesse Bates or Sean Sims or one of those guys. They not only get an interception on Phillip Rivers, but they return it actually. Like, they've had like 4 interceptions this year, and only one of them has had actually any return yards. It's mostly been the guys like just getting in and falling down immediately because they catch it off balance and they have nowhere to run. So there's going to be an interception on Phillip Rivers, and there's going to be actual return yardage to get the offense in some type of manageable scoring range, and that could be the score that makes the difference in terms of them winning, or at least this time losing close.
I think that was the only interception where they netted positive yards on a return. Was that the William Jackson one against Cleveland? That's the only one I can remember.
And that was knocked out by a penalty by Cleveland.
Right. I was going to follow it up with that one. Yeah. I'm going to say whether or not it results in a win, I don't know, but I think the Bengals bounce back in a huge way on offense. I think a pissed off Joe Burrow from last week is going, and he's a perfectionist. He's a guy who watches film. He's a smart guy. He's a smart quarterback. I'd like to think that he will learn from a lot of things last week, both of his own mistakes and from players around him. So I think the Bengals put up 30 plus this week. So at least 27 more points than they put up the week prior against a good Indianapolis defense. I'll go bold with that. I don't know if that leads to a win. I have the Bengals actually losing this game. I think I had them 31. Some predictions I had were about 31-24 or so, or something in that range. But I think the Bengals put up a lot of points this week, and we'll have a much more enjoyable brand of football to watch. That's my shot to call this week.
We're 5 weeks into this, and even though they're 1-3-1, we're still pretty optimistic in some of these things. I don't know when this is going to change for us.
Yeah, I know. Maybe down this rough gauntlet of the middle of the schedule they've got here, we may change our tune here. So we'll see. But good stuff, John. Let's drop the mic and get on out of here. You got anything for us? A shout out? Anything you want to leave us with?
Not necessarily, no. Nah, I'm good.
I've shouted him out before. When I don't do a lot of shout outs, but I shouted him out on another show this week. He tags us and me and Cincy Jungle in a lot of his stuff. His name is Dalton, and he does a lot of cool stuff on Twitter. He's at Dalton Signature. He does a lot. He's like a freelance graphic designer, so he does a lot of stuff. He's a big Bengals fan. I actually met him in Seattle last year, John, in week 1 out. Very nice guy. And he does a lot of cool stuff with Bengals graphics. He does like even stuff like injury reports and all that kind of stuff. He is a guy, go follow him on Twitter at Dalton Signature. If you're a Bengals fan that wants computer wallpaper or laptop wallpaper or graphics that you want to use, he does really cool stuff and quality work. So I want to shout him out. He always seems to tag us, Cincy Jungle, me, on some really cool work. So I want to make sure he gets some recognition, and maybe if someone's in need of some freelance graphic design work, maybe you can give him a shout and give him some work. That would be good.
Yeah, I like the stuff that he does. And you know what? I forgot who I was going to shout out. I do like the work that Ian Rappaport does. And unfortunately, he's suspended right now from NFL activity because of some misunderstanding on Instagram. He was basically plugging and promoting the Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0. And as it happens...
Uh-oh.
This is bad podcast radio because they can't see, but I actually ordered the thing like a couple days before Rappaport got suspended. So Ian, I stand with you, and so does my my region down there.
Oh, the manscaper. Yeah. So how long's he suspended for this thing?
I have no idea. Like I think it happened late last week. And the only thing I can like equate this to is like Adrian Wojnarowski, the basketball insider. He essentially sent like a pissed off email at like a congressman, and he got suspended for like a week. But like for everything that's been happening in the NFL, I just imagine Rappaport is just like sitting there like fuming because he can't say anything.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Adam Schefter is the go-to guy, I guess, right now, and so is Mortensen for some of that stuff. But good stuff, John. Thanks. And I'm seeing some stuff about listener questions and stuff. We're gonna, as of now, we are planning to do listener questions this Friday. We skipped last week, but I think we're gonna try and get around to it this week. So join us. It'll probably be in the early afternoon, and we'll let you know about times. And so you got to subscribe. You got to subscribe to our channels to get notified right away. It'll probably be early afternoon Eastern time. So join us for listener questions live. There are a lot of different ways to submit questions to us if you want to do that. You can call or text us 949-542-6241 on the line there. You can email us theobinsider@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at BengalsOBI, or if you join us for the live recording of it, you can leave those in a number of different live chats that we've got going. So hopefully you'll join us for that. We've got the pregame show on Sunday, courtesy of Narragansett Beer. John, Matt, and I have been having some fun with that. So join us for that if you are able, up to Bengals kickoff, and we hope to see you then. For John Sheeran, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Orange and Black Insider. We'll see you soon.